Thank you very much for coming along and letting us talk about essay writing skills, how you might approach it. I know it's certainly a big topic of conversation at York. I've got quite a few students coming to speak to me today, tomorrow about their essays, so they're all very interested in hearing about this. So I hope we can be useful to you guys as well. So thank you very much, Simon. You got in there nice and quick. Thank you very much. So here we go. There we are. So I wanted to start us off by talking about, next slide, please. Thank you very much. Choosing the question. Okay, so when you're approaching an essay, I would say this is one of the key features, one of the key choices that you will make. Unsurprisingly, given this is your probably your first choice when it comes here. Okay, so in terms of my top tips when it comes to choosing your essay question, I would say that you need to practice the process of interpreting what the question is asking you to do. Okay, so I would say initially the key skill to develop is determining what are you being asked to do, what kind of content are you looking to include or you're being asked to include, and is there any particular format that it is requiring from you. Okay, so if you have a question that is formulated as a question, that is with a question mark at the end, you will need to give a direct response to that question, answering the question. Okay, if you have an essay question that has discuss at the end, then you will need to give a more rounded view of the topic and then come to your argument and tell us the answer to the question. Okay, so interpreting the question is a key point here. I would say that one good way to practice this that I try and get my students to do is to look at the list of essay questions that you have, that you're assigned. I typically give 8 or 9 different questions that students can answer. And I typically ask students to practice the process of interpreting what each of those 8 or 9 essay questions is asking them to do. It's something they can come and chat to me about. And I think it's typically what is very possible in any politics department. So if you want to go along to your tutor, interpret the questions and ask them, have I got this right? Am I interpreting what I need to do here correctly? Okay. I would say the next step is to think about developing your argument. Okay. When it comes to selecting your question and interpreting your question, the next step will be, what do you know about this? What do you know when it comes to looking at, what do you know about the topic already? Is there something that you can already formulate an answer to the question? Is it something that you need to go away and do some extra research? So this is going to be something that can guide your essay writing process. Next slide, please, Simon. It's just cut off ever so slightly at the top here for me. Can we go? Sorry, Simon, can we go back to there we go. So why did the US invade Iraq in 2003? Discuss in relation to IR theory. Okay, so this is an essay question that I have assigned my students, and they will be answering this in about 2 months' time. So if you can, I'll give you a couple of seconds to just think about what the essay question is asking you to do. If you'd like to put in the chat any kind of comments that you have, what would the essay question be asking you to do? What do you interpret from the format of the question? I'll look at those now if you want to pop those in the chat for me. Wait a couple more seconds, see if anyone has any. Oh, there we go. See if anyone has any. So yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Amita. So it's yes, as you said, there is a 2-part to this question. There's a 2-part structure to what I'm asking here. Yeah. Any other comments on the format of the question? Yes, thank you very much, Andrea, as well, to give us a little bit extra there, seeing 4 elements: the why, the significance of the event, apologies, my screen's gone back. There we go. And discuss a balanced argument, focusing on IR theory. Okay, so I would say here, in terms of the question as I'm asking it, as I ask my students. Thank you very much, Jim. A really interesting take on it as well, giving us that kind of what independent variable, a bit more of a political science approach to this, right? So I would say in terms of what I'm asking here, I'm asking my students to come up with a very direct answer to the question, and as Andrea outlined, the why. Okay, it's what we're focusing on here is why did the US make this decision? Okay, why did the US invade Iraq in 2003? And I want a bit more of a general discussion as well, while still maintaining a focus in terms of the answer to the question. Okay, I still want to see a more broad overview of the different answers that there could be to this question. Okay, so what would be beneficial here would be to look at what other answers have there been? Have other theories come up with different responses to this? Have other IR theories come up with a particular answer to this question? Okay, what would those be? What do you think of those? Giving us some of that critical take on those theoretical explanations, and then giving your view of which one is more persuasive. Okay, so one example could be that you could take a realist approach to this question and then show me the realist argument whilst also demonstrating why it is more effective than perhaps a liberal or a constructivist explanation answering this question. Okay? So I would strongly encourage students to look at the whole range of the essay questions available to them and then interpret what those might be, practicing the process of interpreting the essay questions. Okay, Simon, next slide, please. Thank you very much. So here, this is something I always start off any essay writing session with, which is an insight into what we mean by this argument. Okay, so thinking about what you need to do with this, what is the argument? How are we answering this question with an argument? Okay, so an opinion, apologies. So an opinion would be, you should eat chocolate, and I thoroughly agree with this. You should eat chocolate, absolutely. Going a little further, you could say, okay, a claim would be dark chocolate is good for people. Interesting. I'm not sure I'd be able to get away with making that kind of statement. I don't really have the background to explain it, but what we can say is the argument goes even further still, and this is a more progressive argument, okay? This essay argues that because of the high percentage of cacao in dark chocolate, most people experience both psychological and physical benefits from consuming a moderate amount of dark chocolate. Okay, so think about how you would frame this kind of argument. How would you go from a particular opinion that you might have, how you might develop that into formulating an argument, okay? Grounding it in the literature, grounding it in what you've covered on your course, but also grounding it in your own views as well, giving us your thoughts in response to the question. Simon, next slide, please. So I would say planning is crucial. Okay, I'd say apologies. So the planning process is crucial, and any student who has been taught by me will have been bored witless by this. Okay, it is something I bang on about quite a lot in all my teaching, but I would say it's a crucial part of creating a more stress-free process when it comes to writing an essay, but also giving you an opportunity to reflect on the process a little bit more as you're going along. How effective is this point that I'm making? How well grounded in the literature is this? Okay, so I would say the first step when it comes to your planning, when it comes to planning your essay, is to look at previous feedback that you've received. Okay, what have you been told you've done well when it comes to an essay? What have you been told is an area for you to improve? If you are told that your argument needs a bit more development, that's something you can focus on in your essay writing process or essay planning process. So if you are told that you need to engage with more literature, support your claims with more literature, something you can be conscious of moving forward. So one thing I tell a lot of my students to do is to have a singular document in which all feedback that they receive is kept. All the areas that they've done really well, all the areas that they might want to improve upon, and looking at those common themes. Okay, and that should be your first port of call when it comes to writing any essay. Okay, and then following that, the next step is to give us your initial take. What would be your initial attempt at answering this question? What is your initial argument that would answer this question? Okay, if you can start stating that, if you can start telling us what that is in your planning process, then you can start to frame what comes afterwards, key points and the general spine of your argument. Okay, if you're less confident on that, you're feeling actually maybe I need to understand this topic a little bit more, or you're finding it tough to formulate a particular argument. Okay, that's a process where reading can really help you. Okay, reading around the subject, looking at your reading lists, looking at what you've been assigned to have a look at, okay, and having reading this to then develop your opinion, develop your argument, which can then structure what comes afterwards. Okay, following outlining your argument, what are the key points in support of this argument? Okay, you've set out your argument. I would advise writing it in a single sentence. If you can formulate your argument in one line, one sentence, then you've probably developed it in a really good way, really good, efficient way. Okay, so following on from that, what are the key points that you will need to make? If we were to look back at that question from the previous slide, which particular IR theory are you going to focus on? Okay, if you're taking a realist point of view, well, then you're going to need to explain what realism is, why you think it's a useful perspective to explain the Iraq War. Okay, and then you can start drawing on other theories and say, right, I am arguing that realism gives us the best explanation of why the UK decided to invade Iraq in 2003, because it is because of these reasons, and then show why these reasons, whatever they may be, are more effective than those proposed by a liberal explanation or those proposed by a constructivist explanation. Okay. And from those key points, you can then start to formulate your spine, your overarching outline of how you're going to link each point back to that question. Okay, so this is a key thing that I'm stressing to my students is the need to signpost your argument. Simon, next slide, please. Yes, here we go. So as you can see, got a slightly grainy picture, apologies, of the M1. Okay, so we're looking at signposts here, and this is a key part of the planning process. Okay, thinking about your budgeting and your signposting. So I'd say that a key step is to think about how you are going to signpost your argument. So if you were to be driving along on the M1 and you saw this sign, you would see that you are 12 miles away from Nottingham, 43 from Sheffield, and 76 away from Leeds. Okay, so you can see where you are going from looking at these signposts. And as you go further along, you will see those numbers start to decrease as you get closer to Nottingham, Sheffield, and then Leeds. So key to any argument in any essay is signposting the argument, telling the reader where you are going and how you are going to get there. Okay, which points are you going to make? Remember, I stressed before, looking at the key points in your argument, and then setting out your spine, looking at the spine of the argument that you're going to make. How are you going to link each point back to the argument, showing the reader how that particular point supports your argument and helps you answer the question. Okay. And if you were to be a particularly dangerous driver and you were to stick your head out the window as you're driving along the M1 and to look backwards at the other carriageway, the reader will be able to, you will be able to see those signposts going back to where you've come from. Okay, if it was from Nottingham, from Sheffield, or from Leeds. Okay, so as a reader, I should be able to look from particular paragraphs in your essay and see how You have reached that point by looking backwards through the essay. Okay.
You look like a Chelsea supporter. I can see it actually.
Sorry about that. And we can also look at budgeting as well. Okay. Key part of any essay is the word count, usually. Okay. Students will always tell me that they either struggle to fill the word count or struggle to cut their essays down to fit the word count. Either way, figuring out how many words you have and how you're going to deploy them best is a key part of the planning process. Okay, so think about how many words you might need to use in your introduction. How many words do you expect to need to use in your conclusion? And then for each subsequent section in the middle or each paragraph, think about how many words you think you might need to use so that you aren't going over the count too far and creating issues for you in your proofreading, which I know Simon's going to speak about next. Okay. You can also think about budgeting of your references. Okay. If you have a particular key scholar that you are going to use, you don't want to over rely on any particular single source. So thinking about where you are going to best deploy different references is going to be crucial to making sure that you're not over relying on any individual scholar. That way you can show a breadth of knowledge and a breadth of reading. Okay, so think about your budgeting of words and your references as you are also developing this planning process. Next slide, please, Simon. Thank you very much. So these are just some final points that I like to stress when I'm talking to students about their essay writing. Okay. So firstly, write clearly, write in clear grammatical English. Okay, make sure that that is still a focus for you. It's very particular essay writing, but it still needs to be very clear and grammatical. Okay, think about avoiding long sentences. If it is a particularly long sentence, ask why. Is there a real need for it to be a single sentence? Okay, if it does, fine, but then consider your deployment of other sentences around it. Shorter sentences can help speed up the process and can help vary reading speed, which generally helps the reader engage. Okay, I'm sure Simon will be very happy that I'm stressing as my third point. Allow time for proofreading and editing. Okay, don't just plan to write it and finish the writing process at 5 minutes to midnight when you eventually submit your essay. Okay, I learned that in my own undergrad studies quite a few times before I actually implemented that lesson. Then fourth, we can look at avoiding colloquialisms, avoiding opinionated language. Avoid saying things like, I believe, or it's terrible that. Okay. So when it comes to an academic essay, we want to hear your views and your arguments structured through the learning that you've done on the course, but it's crucial to show your views. But importantly, it's not your belief. You don't believe that realism is a more effective explanation of why the UK joined, or why the US, sorry, invaded Iraq in 2003. It's not your belief system, it's your opinion. It's your argument, grounded in theory, grounded in the literature, but it's your opinion, not a belief system. Okay, so be careful about what kind of language you're using. Fifth, you can look at breaking your writing into particular paragraphs, making sure that each paragraph has a single point. Okay, it is a really tough process reading overly long paragraphs. I think the record that I've ever come across was 2.5 pages, single paragraph in an essay. Really difficult to get into, right? Actually, there were multiple points in there, so splitting them up a little bit more and helping them flow helps the reader engage with your work. Okay, make sure that you're hitting all the kind of editing things that you need to be doing for your particular universities. Okay, think about the line spacing, the paragraph structure. Do you need to justify it? What kind of typeface are you using? All these kind of things need to be looked at. And then finally, as my top tip, make sure that your referencing is consistent. Okay, you can try and definitely do try and hit the right kind of referencing. Okay, but if you are unsure or if you're struggling, best thing is to make sure it looks professional by making it look consistent. If you make a minor mistake, but it is still consistent, that comes across better, that looks better than making a complete range of different mistakes. If you make every single different mistake you can possibly do and make them all differently in different references, it looks more disorganized and more chaotic. Okay, so try and implement that kind of consistency in your writing. Okay, so those are my top tips to essay writing. Simon, I think next slide is you, I think.
Thanks, Chris. What's happened? Yeah. So you will have noticed in the advert that we also were meant to be joined by Priscilla. Unfortunately, she can't make it today, so I am going to read her slides, and therefore forgive me. But Chris has talked very articulately about the kind of his top tips. One of the key things that came out from that for me was around the reading. And so one of my top tips, which I'm surprised about often with students, is that they are not using the reading lists. Those reading lists are often provided, well, always provided by staff. And I'm surprised that they're not more utilized. I think there's a couple of things that come out from this. One is the fact of, I mean, Priscilla's called it snowballing, but I think the key thing here is the fact that, you know, use the reading lists to start you off. You can either put them into Google Scholar to see which references have been cited by other references that build your reading list, but also you can probably put it into the sort of the different search engines that you get through your university library. So I think the important bit about this is that the reading lists are not there for, are there for you to use, and make sure that please that you use them. And again, you know, going to be a constant theme around this, you know, if the support exists in your institution, make sure that you use it. So the literature research is really important. That tip about putting some of the key readings into a search engine is really good, because it allows you both to update your references, but also to check whether there's been any change in the debate. So you take, for example, the question that Chris set, there may have been a flurry of research in that area in 2005, 2006, 2007. But then scholars might be returning to that similar topic in 2020, where, you know, with a period of time to reflect, there may be different views appearing. So you want to make sure that you're aware of any of the contemporary debates. There are ways of maintaining your references. So, you know, different things here, EndNote, Mendeley, etc. Often the major important thing here would be to check what's available through your institution, see if there's anything available, and see which one works for you. Obviously, you'll be sitting in lectures, you'll be in seminars, you'll be reading. Work out how you would like to take notes. What works for you? No one else really needs to see your notes unless there's a reason why you would be submitting them to a reflective journal or something like that. But make sure that you have a system that you understand and that you are able to come back to. It's amazing how often I find that my own notes, I need to go back and reread stuff because I haven't actually made them as comprehensive as I'd like. I think the other thing that's important here is, and again, why some of the reference managers can help, is that it allows you to put down notes, attribute the sources, particularly if you're doing things like cutting and pasting from PDFs. You really want those to, anything you do like that, to sit in a document on your laptop or PC, but very explicitly, clearly marked that it's not your words. So you may want to use a highlight color or something like that to show that you've cut and pasted it, but always put the correct citation next to it, so there's no chance that you'll get confused when you come back to it. Priscilla was talking about essays versus thesis, when I think she meant the kind of undergraduate dissertation. Again, I think there's some similar-ish points between the two. I mean, often the thesis is longer than an essay. What you may want to consider, again, in the points that Chris was very helpfully highlighting around things like structure. So those would be the points that I would stress around writing an undergraduate dissertation, is that structure and the signposting is even more important if you're writing 8,000, 10,000 words. But the kind of highlights here that Priscilla is suggesting, again, you know, concise and accurate, make sure that you're trying to connect your readings together so that you can start to build up a picture of what the scholarship looks like within the literature. So again, there's a lot of really great books on note-taking and really some really excellent sort of work available around here. But often what it really comes down to, I would argue, is the ability to manage your time. And so I found this on the University of Northampton website, and I think it's very important because you will have multiple deadlines. And what I really liked about this was the fact that it's about the plan backwards. So whatever works for you, there are different types of charts that you can employ to plan your time. There are different apps that you can get, but make sure that you know which deadlines are coming up and work backwards from that around your other existing commitments, be that work, reading for seminars, other things that you have on in your life, and start to plan accordingly. I think this is also a key employability skill around sort of managing multiple deadlines. And again, it's something that can be tricky to do, but the more that you're able to plan out, the more that you should be able to ensure that you're able to submit on time and essays that are along the lines that sort of Chris was talking about in terms of the look and the feel, something that I'll come back to in a moment. And then again, you know, start to think about how you're going to break up your day, including time for yourself. Again, really nice graphic from the University of Northampton, slightly unrealistic in perhaps in the fact that it doesn't have anything about work, as in paid work. But again, think about this in terms of working and how you're going to work. We often hear students say, but I was in the library from 8 until 10, 8 in the morning till 10 at night. But what I think is important here, it's about how to work effectively. So making sure that you're very clear about what you're reading, you're able to discard material that isn't relevant, that you've got the types of things in your mind that Chris was talking about at the beginning of this session. If you have that, then you should be able to be effective in these kind of breaking down your time into chunks, because it's also very important that you have a break and that you have some time to reflect, but also obviously to think about other things that you may need to do. So what we want you to be able to do, and again, Chris was talking about the 5 minutes to midnight or whatever time your essay is due in, but it's really important. I think this is one of the things that I would say is the biggest lesson I've learned as a marker of student work, is the ability to give yourself the time just to reread it, to redraft it if necessary, to make sure that you make the changes to format and things like that, to reread it, to make sure that you've not included some of the kind of perennial, I don't know how to describe it, almost perhaps the pet hates of markers, you know, some people argue, it is argued, those sorts of things. If you're able to reread an essay, if you're able to re-examine it in the cold light of day, then you can often correct those types of errors. You can make sure that your conclusion and your introduction match, that your introduction says exactly what it's going to do, as Chris helpfully pointed out at the beginning. And again, you know, make sure that you adhere to all of the departmental guides. Page numbering is a sort of slight bugbear of mine. So all of those things, again, need time. And we often think that, why would I need to redraft? But even the American Constitution was redrafted. So, you can see, if you like, at the bottom paragraph that somebody, I think there's something on the American Constitution website will tell you who, where they've actually crossed something out and put, "We hold these truths to be self-evident." So, you know, revising, choosing the words, having that time, I think is really something that I would argue would be one of my top tips for this session to take away. So again, you know, some really obvious things perhaps, but worth saying. Make sure you know how to submit your essay and by what time. You know, make sure you understand your university rules on plagiarism. Often plagiarism is a result of not necessarily an attempt to cheat, but often the fact that students run out of time or they struggle to manage the multiple deadlines. So again, you know, we can talk more about that later on, but I think, again, just understand the rules, understand what you're doing. But again, good note taking, following the structures that Chris was outlining, following the kinds of advice around note taking that Priscilla outlined. Hopefully those will be enough to protect you from the accusations of plagiarism. A new thing for us as academics is artificial intelligence, you know, things like ChatGPT. It's something that universities are struggling to understand, and we can come back to this in the discussion, but each university has developed rules or policies around artificial intelligence that, again, would be useful for you to check to make sure that you're aware of what you can and can't do. But again, alongside all of that is that there's a lot of support available at university, whether it's through university libraries, through academic personal tutors. All of those sorts of things are worth checking out in advance. Also, it's also worth understanding what support's available if things don't go to plan. So again, where would you go for advice and help? It's easier to check that now than it is if you need to later on when things are a little bit less calm. Because I think that would be the thing that we would want to stress most, is the fact that it's important to look after yourself. You know, I was looking at a university and they were showing that their students were doing 14 different types of assessment over an academic year. So there's a lot of assessment to do. You add up the amount of words you've got to write, you add in things like the exams. There will be another session on exam technique, I think on the 8th of April. And if you're interested in that, run by some other people. But, you know, the important thing is to look after yourself, make sure that you take breaks, make sure that you are able to comfortably handle the workload. And if there are some challenges arising, please make sure that you seek the support that's there. So a bit of a whistle stop tour. There's on the prospect site, there is some advice about courses and study from an international relations student that we thought might be useful. And has anybody got any questions? What we have got is, I'm just going to stop sharing for a minute. What we have got at the top is of the chat is this Menti. So hopefully if you click on the link at the top, that should then be able to give us an insight into any questions or anything that you want to get out of the session, so that we can direct our replies to your interests. But yeah, anything that you'd want to add to that, Chris?
Well, I think I'd just add that I completely agree with the need to just look after yourselves, right? That this especially is a particular time when students are starting to feel more stress. There have never been as many students who are in paid employment as they are right now. So think about that. Make sure that you're working on your timetabling, your planning of your time, but also looking after yourself. And actually a break is going to be useful. It's one of the key features of one of the techniques that Simon Slide pointed out earlier was the Pomodoro technique, right? And built into that technique is a need to have repeated breaks, repeated time away. Okay, so I definitely encourage that. And when it comes to ChatGPT or AI in essays, really encourage students to look at what your university rules are, and alongside that, to also do the work yourself. All right, it's a very difficult thing to replicate with other tools, but the process of condensing a reading, doing the readings for yourself will really help you learn the content. So I would really definitely encourage that. If anyone has any questions, though, please do feel free to to ask us.
I mean, just while we're waiting, there's a really interesting question by Meta. Really great reply, Chris. I think what I would say, and I'm hopefully putting words in Chris's mouth as well, is peer-reviewed papers are much, much better than articles that you find on websites, partly because there's a clue in the name. The peer review element means that there's been some degree of external scrutiny on it, but also it means that you're in a world where there's reputable journals, there's a quality control, and again, hopefully you'll be able to trust that source critically. But sometimes we see lots of students are using articles that they find on the internet. Not saying don't do it, but you've got to be very careful, because you're not necessarily always sure what the politics of a organization are, or the reputableness of that source, if I can find the right term. So yeah, that's why Google Scholar, I would argue, is better than Google, because Google Scholar does tend to take you to those types of academic sources. So that's an interesting question, Ian. I didn't know, again, Turnitin is used by lots of universities to check for plagiarism. Never known often whether it's actually available to students to actually sort of try before you buy type of thing. But
yeah, I think it is. I'd say be careful about doing it on your own, university submission site, because I know that for us, we're a one and done. You have one submission, but you're absolutely right about other ways to access it, Ian. There are other ways to get to use Turnitin. But if you were to check on your university site, on your university policies, your department policies as well, you might be able to find out that for you guys, you can just submit more than once, and that would actually help you double check. But really want to stress, you need to check the rules at your home university. Okay, Meta, I would say it's nothing silly about that question at all. When it comes to Google Scholar, plenty of the papers will be peer reviewed. It is rare, but some won't be peer reviewed. But I would say that a really good way to help with that is to have a look at the particular journal that the paper is from. Okay, if you were to click on the link, typically Google Scholar will give you a hyperlink to the journal homepage from which the paper is taken, and that will give you a really good insight. Almost all journals that I've ever come across will explicitly say this is a peer-reviewed journal. I know that BESA's journals do, so it's really, really easy to see that kind of that question, but nothing silly about it at all. And great point, Adam. Yeah, I'd say for the extra 10-20 seconds it takes, it's always worth double checking. It doesn't take too much extra, and you will start to learn, oh, this journal is very trusted, this is a peer reviewed, and you will learn that maybe others are a little less. So I'd definitely say. So Simon, we have another question on do you have any tips on critical analysis? I am told that my writing is often descriptive. So do you have any tips, Simon? What would you say?
So that's the real challenge, and I understand the problem is often we say be more critical, and obviously by that we don't necessarily mean criticize. I think the way that I would approach critical analysis is by taking the essay question that Chris has outlined, is the fact that there are, you can describe what happened. So was the US invading Iraq in 2003, wasn't it? So you can describe that. You can explain what's happened. You can explain the outcome of that particular invasion. By reading around the topic, you start to understand the ways that different scholars understand the actions of the US, for example. So, I mean, I'll give you a different example. Then, for example, my area is more the EU politics. And what you find is that the EU is quite a divisive topic. And you saw this with Brexit. You've also seen it in referendum in other countries. So what you start to realize is that you've got pro and anti-EU opinion. But when you delve into it, the critical approach realizes that there are pro-EU voices on the left, there are pro-EU voices on the right, and there are similar anti-EU voices on the left and anti-EU voices on the right. And often they might even be coming at it from the same point. So, you know, something that you'd find is that left and right critics of the European Union worry about sovereignty. So left critics argue that sovereignty of, say, the British state is taken away and therefore they cannot enact the socialist left-wing politics that they would like. Whereas there's a similar argument for the right critique of loss of sovereignty, but they come at it from very different political ideological perspectives. So that gives you the sense of the basis of the criticality, but then you need to be able to sort of explain to the reader which of the arguments you find to be the most convincing. So I think those off the top of my head would be the sort of, you know, the ways that I would want to show to students. It's about the delving in, it's about the fact that, and again, what can be really important is how you organize your essay to show that. So if you group together the points that in the paragraphs like Chris was talking about at the beginning, that helps the reader to understand the criticality that you are showing around the different spine elements of your essay. Is there anything that you would add to that, or is anything that you would disagree with?
Well, I don't disagree with any of that. I would say a really good kind of top tip that I will give some students is to, if you're being told that maybe you need to have a bit more criticality in your work, if you need to have a bit more of an argument, I would say your planning process needs to start from that argument, right? Not necessarily start from a description of what will, you know, what has happened, but to have more of an outline of what the essay will argue, and then start each paragraph, start your planning process for each paragraph from that analytical take of how that point supports the argument. You can then feed in all the other information that you need for the plan later, but starting from the argument kind of means that it's difficult to ignore that, it's difficult to overlook it. You know, if you're a bit tired, a bit stressed, writing to a deadline, you can maybe start overlooking parts of your plan. But if it's front and center, and that's the big, you know, front center part of the points that you're making in the plan, it's difficult to overlook that. I would also say a bit of criticality when it comes to sources that you're introducing, right? What do you like about a particular source? Is it persuasive? Is it, you know, not persuasive, and why? Is it because they've got a really good data set to be drawing on and they're making really useful statements off that? Or is it, you know, because of who they've interviewed maybe for the piece? Those kind of things can really help getting a little bit more criticality in there. Going back to the chat, I'll just have a little look at some of the other questions.
There's one that's quite important, I think. Is it from Jim? This is exactly what we mean. Your university might let you use ChatGPT as a proofreading tool. We cannot say definitively, because rules on proofreading vary across the institution. So again, I know that sounds like a bit of a woolly answer, but it's very tricky because these things are evolving and moving very fast. So, I mean, do you want to have you got any tips on introductions?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would agree with Simon when it comes to the ChatGPT as a proofreading tool, but I'd also say a lot of university libraries will have some form of academic session, where they might be able to offer some tips on how to do proofreading. And that you could also look into the provision from your department as well, if there's an academic skills person. So there are other means of doing this if you need to. Just double check your institution rules and what kind of offering they have in this area, okay? And when it comes to an introduction, I would say be nice and efficient. I'm one of these people who has spent too many hours sat on the sofa reading 100 different essays all on exactly the same topic. So I like it upfront, very direct. So I would personally say start your essay with, this essay will argue that, and then tell me what it is. Okay, it's front and center. It means that I, as the reader, can't possibly ignore it, can't get away from it. And you, as the writer, are starting on that right tone. You're starting that, I'm being direct, I'm answering the question from the beginning. I mean, it's not necessarily the most, flowery language. You won't really win any Booker prizes, but well, you're not submitting this for the Booker Prize anyway, so it's fine. But I would say that would be a key part of it. So when you're writing your introduction, think about, what are you arguing? Why are you arguing it? And tell us explicitly why that is the argument that you're going to make. What is it that means that this is the right answer to this question? And how are you going to do it? Okay. You can tell me the kind of points that you're going to make, how you're going to structure those points, and give us a bit of a roadmap for the rest of the essay. Okay. So if I'm reading the introduction, I should know what you're going to argue, why you're arguing it, and how you're going to broadly structure that. Okay, that would, anything that you'd add in there, Simon?
No, I agree. I think, efficient. I mean, one of my friends published an article, and he had this brilliant introduction that I use all the time with my students, and he does exactly that in an academic article. He states very clearly what he's going to argue. He says, first of all, he's going to do this, second, he's going to do that, third, he's going to do that. Bizarrely enough, not bizarrely enough, a bit flippant comment, but he follows that structure absolutely throughout the article. It's really easy to follow, and then you get to the end and he sums up the 5 points. So those are the kind of things that I think are important, and it kind of links into Adam's point about how much is enough. I think there's something there. I haven't ignored your question, Anna. We'll come back to that in a minute, but we're trying to link the two things together. I think what you need is that, going back to Chris's brilliant description of the spine, what are the 3, 4, 2, whatever it is, key points that you need to focus on to help you answer the question, and then give those equal weighting. So, I think that's the point. And then it's about the interrogation of those individual points as part of how they all fit together in terms of answering the question that you're being asked. So, this is the key point about the sort of, and again, this is where your reading and your, notes from your lectures, your discussions in seminars, discussions with tutors, if that's available, discussions with your peers. Again, I would suggest that's really important. It gives you an idea of the kind of, what are the key debates between the different perspectives. Again, going back to Chris's slide on that, if you are able to identify what you think are the key sort of points, then that will give you the and again, there are some clever things that you might think about in terms of, you might write in your introduction something along the lines, or in your first section, you might say, the role of the health service and the role of the Ministry of Defence are important, but this essay will focus on X, Y, and Z, because those are the key topics. So you can show the reader that you understand the broader landscape, and that may link again to some of the history question that Sophia was asking earlier on. But again, it becomes, you're able to then show that you understand that, but these are the key points that you'll be focusing on.
Yeah, I definitely second that, and say one useful judgment of, what is enough is think about your description, think about the background that you might be giving. And as you are proofreading, I would say, think about what is the value that is added from this. Is it crucial to understanding a particular point that you're making, or is it just interesting general background knowledge? That kind of question of, is this important to understand the analysis that I will make, or is this just general background that I've come across in my reading? There is a difference, and it's important to just acknowledge what that might be and think about, is this adding? And if it's adding to supporting your argument, useful. If it's just general background, I would then question about whether it's really needed, right? It's boosting your word count without necessarily helping you make the case that you're trying to make. So that's a point when you can think about, oh, actually, can I say some more analytically because you've freed up some of those words through your proofread. In terms of, I think I'm just looking here, we have so in terms of Jim's second question about using different methodological approaches, that is very much down to your individual department and I would say even your individual module choices. So that's something I would strongly encourage chatting to your supervisor, your tutor, or the course leader on that kind of subject, because then they will be able to say what is appropriate. And that kind of leads us into answering Anna Frank's question about incorporating post-colonial theories. I don't think I'm putting any words into Simon's mouth here when I say it's down to the course, right? If you are studying a particular module where you're looking at IR theories, great, you can introduce them anywhere. If there is an explicit focus in a question, let's say, on constructivism or on realism, then you'll have to think very carefully about whether this is something that you can incorporate post-colonial theory on, or is it something where actually, because of the nature of the question, you can't really introduce it, depending on the kind of question you're being asked. If in the question that I used earlier on, if I'd said, why did the US invade Iraq in 2003, discuss in relation to realism, I would then have to question why, if you're introducing post-colonialism, you'd have to do a real good job of explaining why we need to have that, because I've explicitly asked you to discuss in relation to a different IR theory. But if it's more general, then generally you'd be able to do that. I'd say that's something to chat to your academic tutor or the person leading the module, usually the one who's also written the essay questions, and that might be a really useful way for them to give you that insight. Is there anything you want to add on there? So?
No, I think, again, really, really great advice. The important thing is, even if you went with that question with a realist and a constructivist kind of debate, you still need to justify why you've chosen those. So just because they are seen to perhaps be it's sort of the focus of a lot of IR courses, you would need to show why you've chosen to compare those two theories and not a post-colonial theory or liberal or some other theory. So again, I would completely argue and completely agree with Chris that it's all about answering the question that you're set. And again, that is often quite important. It's, if it does ask you, even if you absolutely dislike realism, if that's the question, if it says using a realist framework, then you need to do that and perhaps have a conversation in a different world about why you haven't got a question about post-colonial theories and things like that. But again, these are debates that are very live within institutions, and we're seeing changes happening around the sort of introduction of different perspectives, new reading lists, etc., etc. So I think I would strongly agree about the conversation, but there's no reason why you can't if the question is like the one that Chris has set. So in terms of the mentee, we've got critical analysis theory. We've got things about getting first class marks and distinctions. Got a policy brief versus an essay. So
well, that's an interesting one as well. I think if I can just focus, there's a question from Ian when it comes to being inventive and sort of the off-field approaches that you might want to take, which, can contribute to a higher mark in a particular essay. I mean, my initial reaction is you don't want it to be too off field, right? That actually follow the, number one, follow the rules that you've been given by the course that you're on, right? That actually there is an advantage maybe to taking a slightly different approach, maybe taking an unexpected turn or a particular framing of the question. That can be really useful. But you don't want to depart so far from what you've been asked that you've not done the kind of basics right. You want to get the basics down and do all of that really, really well before you start going a little bit more inventive. So I would say things like giving a bit of that criticality that we talked about before, giving that criticality and saying this particular theory has a strong explanation, a really powerful, persuasive explanation when it comes to, you know, a particular case, but there is a limitation. Maybe there's a limitation in how it applies to different contexts in terms of post-colonial take on that. Or it could be that it struggles with a particular aspect of a case. And I would say one kind of inventive approach would be to say why you feel that that oversight or that limitation of an argument from a particular theory is present, right? And if you say, let's say realism offers a really useful explanation to the decision to invade Iraq in 2003, but it's flawed because of a particular reason. You explain why that reason is important, why we need to understand that flaw. You could also then respond to that flaw in the argument and say, okay, there's a limitation to the argument, but if we add in this element or this component to theory, we can maybe improve on it, and that will offer a more holistic explanation, a stronger explanation. And that can be one of the really useful ways to get your inventiveness rewarded, if that makes sense. Simon, you've been doing this for a while longer than me. I hope I'm not, you know, not shopping you there. But if you've got any other advice, definitely.
No. I mean, again, you know, I will accept that they are often written in not necessarily the most student-friendly language, but look at what the assessment criteria are saying around what you want to do for, you know, first class and upper second class marks and things like that. I think that bit is, even if, I mean, you know, it would make me wonder why you would choose the question, but even if you really thought the question was awful, you still have to answer that question. It, you know, trying to deconstruct the question doesn't really help you answer the question that's set. So I think, you know, if you really objected to it, I would make sure that I chose a different question. But again, you know, really what we're looking for is your critical engagement around the topic. And therefore, you know, there will be key themes that will emerge from an essay question around, you know, why did the US invade the Iraq in 2003? And the way that you will get the top mark is by your, what's the word? It's the composure and the confidence with which you're able to marshal that evidence, understand the theoretical, empirical context, etc., and put that down in whatever word count we're talking about. And that's the thing. I mean, that's something that is really important with something. If you get given a different type of written assessment, like a policy brief, you know, you're often being asked to be very, very concise. And so, you know, being able to convey something as complicated as why the US invaded Iraq in a 500-word policy brief, what I would argue is all of the points about time management are really crucial there, because to be able to give that level of conciseness, you really have to know why you're focusing on the very key points that you've got in front of you. And you don't have any waffle room that you might in an essay where you can try out a potentially, that might be, you know, that's probably a 3.5 point rather than a full whole major point. And so again, you know, my advice would be anything that requires you to write short pieces often require as much work because of that ability to understand the topic and be able to understand why you're focusing on X and not Y.
Yeah, I would also say I definitely agree with that. the challenge of a short piece is usually as tough as a longer piece. You know, it will be one of the toughest bits that you can write. It will look simple because you think, oh, well, you know, when I write a normal essay, it takes me maybe, you know, a week to write 2,500 words. Well, if I'm writing 500 words, it logically must take me less time, right? You know, that's the useful thing. Typically, no, actually, getting all of your points across really efficiently is probably going to take you as long, almost. So, you know, I think it's a really important thing to say. I'd say, Simon, I've had a private question ask me about getting your voice across in an essay. Is there anything that you'd advise there?
Ooh, I think it is definitely avoiding the I, unless there's an explicit requirement to include the I. I think it's that aspect of really understanding how you are answering this question. And therefore, I think that can be something around the marshalling of evidence. Often the voice comment comes up when you will see students who will have, say, a paragraph of very well-written work citing Featherstone 2003 and the brilliant work that he's done on this topic, and then it will go to Dryden 2002, and then it will go somewhere else, and you think, okay, but you're just sort of repeating what the different authors are saying rather than interrogating it and marshalling the evidence to show that the point that you would want to raise is in line with Dryden 2002, and you critique Featherstone 2003 because of this, this, and this. And I think those are the key aspects of the voice. And again, that's where, sounds a bit repetitive, but the redrafting comes in. The more that I see, you know, particularly in a dissertation, the more you see the second or third draft, that's where the student is able to be very confident in what they're saying, and therefore their voice comes out. So, you know, that ability to give yourself time to redraft, I think, is really key. So what about you? And again, you know, what would be the key things that you'd be looking for in a essay question like that, Chris, in case any of your students are listening?
Well, so I'd say for me, in terms of getting the voice across, I completely agree. The use of I can be a bit can be potentially dangerous. There are some pitfalls there. So unless you're very used to doing it, I would personally say maybe don't start doing it out of the blue. You know, it's something that you either need to have started earlier or really engage with and talk to some tutors about how you go about doing this. I'd also say justifying some of the choices that you're making would be a really useful part of that. So as Simon alluded to in his example, you will be making a lot of choices in your selection of sources, your selection of a theory, something like that, in any essay, right? So, you know, you'll be doing that in any essay. And one thing that distinguishes between a really very, very good or excellent essay and a more general, you know, mid-level essay is explaining some of those choices made, justifying some of the choices, and explaining why it's the right choice to make. You know, so why have you selected this theory, not another? Why have you selected this particular approach or not another? So when it comes to my essay question, I'll be talking to my students about this tomorrow. We need to see your choice of IR theory. So I'd say looking at either a post-colonial approach, some really interesting stuff there around Orientalism as an approach. You could also look at realism, liberalism, constructivism, some of the main big hitters of the mainstream IR theories. And I'd say I'd want to see a student give me their perception of which one is most persuasive and why, and engage with some of that debate. The liberals say that it's the Iraq War was a realist war, and the realists say the Iraq War was a liberal war. So, you know, they really don't want to be given responsibility for it. No one wants to take responsibility for this. Understandable. But, you know, engage with some of that debate. Which theory do you think is most persuasive in explaining? And typically, I like my students to give a comparison to at least one other theory. Why is the theory that you're choosing more persuasive than another one. So if you take a realist explanation, it's showing power, reestablishing power, reasserting power. Maybe it's that kind of security maximization or power maximization, some of those things, using that justification and showing, well, actually that's much more important than any of the kind of democratic peace theory or democratic spreading of ideas, any of those kind of ideas. No, we need to get away from that. And personally, when I wrote my PhD on the Iraq War, so I will bang on about it, to no end. But one of the most infuriating parts of it was explaining why it's not just an oil war. Anyone and everyone would tell me, usually in the pub, that it was just an oil war. Don't worry about it, And so just giving an explanation of, okay, if it's an oil war, why? If it's giving those justifications, showing, developing some of that thinking around it is going to be crucial in any question like that. But yeah, I think that would be my general take on it. I think we've got some people who are leaving and heading out. Is there anyone who has any more questions that we can help with? Here we go.
Are you getting private messages?
Sorry, no, I'm not getting. No, this one's public. This isn't private. So
okay.
We've got one from.
Sorry.
Sorry, I shouldn't clap on recording, should I? From Meta asking about the year of particular readings and would it be a bad idea to use mainly old papers? Well, I think our perception of old and our students' perception of old might be slightly different, but I'll let Simon take this one.
Again, I would contextualize this. It depends on what you're being asked. I mean, if you're being asked to compare Marx and Smith around various things, then they were written in the day. I think what you've got to consider is, like I said, there may have been, I mean, again, Chris was obviously part of this debate that, when did you do your PhD on Iraq?
2016 I started. I finished in 2021. So I've not been around for too long.
So that shows a really good example of the fact that, when you were doing it in 2016, what sources were you using?
Well, most of my sources, academic sources, were 2004 to about 2008, really. That was the real height of the period, yeah. So
like I said in the talk, there's probably a 2004 to 2008, real rush of publications trying to understand this. And then, Chris and other scholars, 8 years later on, were sort of, okay, with a little bit more distance, how can we interpret this? How can we look at this? And things like that. So, I mean, I think, that's why, Major, I'd argue that you want to just, again, it may be that you're asked to read the canon on Orientalism or post-colonialism. That may take you to stuff that's written in the 1960s. Depending on what the question is asking you and what the answer you're trying to come up with, it will depend. So again, I would be very wary of using, probably the best I can argue is, if you're talking about Britain's relationship with the European Union in 2024, and you cite a paper from 1997, that is difficult to do because the paper in 1997 couldn't understand the context in 2004. Whereas if you're talking about the Blair government and things like that, then yes, a paper from 1997 might be appropriate. So I think it's important to make sure that you're using your sources. There would be a source from 2004 that would help you answer the question, sources from 2004 that would help you answer the questions that Chris has set. So I think, again, it's important that you kind of get into the debates. Ian's just asked a question about the types of realism. Again, what you're trying to show is there a realist perspective? If there isn't, why do the realist community disagree and how? And they're the kind of things that we'd want to show isn't necessary. So again, that's the sort of nuance and sophistication that you will be aiming to get to by the sort of the top end marks. Is there anything, what would you say about that kind of question in terms of the, I don't know, like subsets of theories? I don't know how best to describe them, but
yeah, I mean, I'd say it's important. I mean, this is always going to come down to the particulars of the question that you're asked. You know, so it can be a really nice way of taking a question and giving it some focus. So, for example, the question that I set, you could say, you know, that actually realism, it has, you know, a range of perspectives when it comes to the Iraq War, but you are going to take the one given by, you know, defensive or offensive realism, neo-real, you know, whatever particular type of neo-realism you want to take, and giving that really focused argument, and then contrast that to the rest of realism, if you wish, can be really useful. I'd also say when it comes to that kind of distinction, I'd say give us the justification. Why, you know, why have you chosen this type of realism over a different one? You know, because if you can give us that justification, it really adds to it. When it comes to some of the readings, I'd say giving a range is generally a good thing. Giving a range of readings is typically a good thing. Depending on the rules of an assessment that you've been set, be careful to double check that. But generally, it can be a useful thing to give a range, but also be aware of the year that it was published, right? You could use that to your advantage and say, well, this paper published in 2015 said this about the UK's relationship with the EU. You can then highlight the key bit of context of the EU referendum, which obviously they in 2015 might not have known was going to happen, might not have known, well, definitely didn't know the results. So it would be a really useful way of showing a particular need to focus on the context, the yearly context. When it comes to kind of more historical pieces, think about why you're using what, and equally with some of the more contemporary pieces. Is it because it's going to add something in particular for the argument that you want to make, or is it simply because it's more current and it came up quicker on Google, or Google Scholar, I should say. That can be useful, showing the really contemporary insight into a particular topic, but it's not necessarily going to add too much more than that. You need to think about what is the reasoning behind using this. Well, I think we've given a general pretty good overview of essay writing. I hope we've made it an interesting session for you guys. If you have any more questions, do feel free to put them in the chat or ask them. Do you have any other points that you think we need to cover, Simon? Anything that we've kind of overlooked?
No, I mean, I think there are some amazing resources out there. The Critical Thinking book by Stella Cotter I've put in the chat. Some people think it feels a bit patronizing. My view is that, it's an introduction to this, and so therefore it may be at different levels. But again, the point behind her writing is the fact that, again, just gets you to think about it, gives you some tips. You might not use the whole book, but there are some things in there that you might find useful. But there's a huge amount of, every university pretty much has a study skills section, people for resources, all of those things. So again, I think what we would argue is, seek out the help, whether it's from the academic staff, the library, whoever you need the help from, and then, make sure that you're prepared with the tools that you need to be able to answer the question. And I think, again, I would end with that really crucial point that Chris started with, which is, it's hard, no one likes doing it, but look at your feedback from previous essays. It may be very specific that you misunderstood Marx's idea about capital, fine, but you can think about why that was. But often there's a repeat in there, and then that's the sort of thing that you can change in terms of improving your introductions, and you can have a look at how to do that, or improving your conclusions, or improving your signposting, and it becomes a more focused conversation. So really do look at your feedback, and not just the mark, which I know is easy to say, but it's a bit like the thing in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, often the number doesn't mean as much as the feedback. So, but yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, absolutely. I think I've had quite a few students this year, especially coming to me, chatting to me about their feedback, and I've said, yeah, put it all together in a single document. What is the overarching theme in some of your feedback? I had a couple of students who came to me and asked me about this, and we were able to talk through the different bits of feedback. And a key theme was signposting their argument. Right? They make a good argument. They outline a really good one in the introduction. Problem is that it's then kind of lost a little bit in the middle of the body of the essay, and then makes a reappearance finally for the conclusion. So working on that, seeing that it was a constant theme, we could quite easily and readily fix that kind of issue, or work on developing that issue. And now they've massively improved in their essays for, relatively speaking, not that much extra work. So it's definitely worthwhile, and I definitely agree. It's not always the easiest thing to do. Personally, I like to do it with cake. Eat cake whilst reading feedback. You always feel better. It's great, wonderful stuff.
There's a very specific question that Anna has raised, which Katie or Juliet might want to pick up later on. But I mean, I think I would argue that BESA is a very welcoming association, lots of opportunities for different activities for postgrads. And again, it's an opportunity to kind of network and get to meet other people, in your position as a postgrad. So go on the website is all I can say, which sounds like a real sort of advert, but have a look at the website, see what the prices are. There's specific activities, I think, for postgraduates. BESA office are here to save me.
Yes, I was just going to chip in and say we have a specific postgraduate network who is run by a committee of postgraduates, and for instance, they've got an event on Thursday actually, which I believe is about AI, but off the top of my head. But I mean, at least once a month, I would say they're running events. They're actually planning on running a virtual conference this year, specifically for postgrads again. And again, we have a new committee each year, we have a new chair, so they're always coming up with new and innovative ideas, and they'll also all be at the annual conference. So if you happen to be coming along to BESA this year, then they'd love to meet you. I'm sure you can message them and find out, but I think they're pgn.network@besa.ac.uk, but it is on our website. So please do have a look at and search for the Postgraduate Network.
Thanks very much.
I think that's it, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've given a good insight into top tips, how to approach it, how to get into the process of writing your essays. If you found it useful, thank you very much. I hope we've been able to answer some questions for you. I think my final thought is be kind to yourself. It's a stressful time, and it never changes, frankly, in terms of being stressful. So look after yourselves. Be kind to yourself, take breaks. Caffeine might be your friend, but it's not always your friend. Okay, so just think about taking breaks from it at times, always useful. And otherwise, come and check out some of the other BESA events, I'm sure. Any other thoughts, Simon?
No, I mean, I also think the thing about the break is that it's the bit where your brain can process what you've been thinking about. So in the same way that your muscles need to recover if you're doing any kind of activity or, preparing for a run or something like that. It's amazing how many rest days you have in a preparation for something like a half marathon. And I think, that bit of processing time is often when your brain will just need to work it all through. But there's I think Katie said at the beginning, or may not have done, but there's a exam technique and revision session on the 8th of April. So that may be really, we've spoken to the people running that, so that would be really informative. And again, hopefully the other BESA sessions, there's topics that they're looking at, the more sort of related topics look really fascinating. So I think it's a great offer. So yeah, but thanks for everyone for coming. It's always a bit strange, these virtual things, because you never see the audience. So
yeah, it's always a bit odd, but we've been able to answer some questions, so I hope we've been useful. But yeah, I think other than that, I'll say goodbye.